G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Lead on Purpose. My name's James Middleton and over the last 20 years I've led teams of all shapes and sizes, from the Australian Air Force through to the private sector, from complex operational environments to high trust industries where precision, accountability and purpose truly matter. These days I help organisations build ethical, purposeful leadership at every level, and I help you become the leader that you want to be. I explore real-world leadership challenges, bring you inspiring stories from experienced leaders, and give you practical strategies to help you lead with confidence, clarity, and purpose. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Steve Baker. Steve is an AI and automation expert, former Air Force pilot, and founder of Autocom Solutions. We discuss the technical and human-centric challenges of AI and automation in the corporate environment. And Steve challenges some of the strongly held assumptions about how businesses can best employ emerging technology. G'day, Steve. Thanks very much, mate, for joining me today. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on to Lead on Purpose and talk about your experience.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, James. Excited to be here for sure.
Awesome, mate. So, I know we're both dealing with some absolutely scorching weather at the moment. So, I love the tropical background you got there. It really speaks to the time of year here in Australia. So, to dive into it, mate, can you just talk me through your career, your journey, and try to weave in a little bit about your experience of leadership along the way?
Yeah, well, long eclectic journey I've had over the length of my career. Started my early days joining the Air Force. Luckily enough to be selected to be a pilot. Started my military piloting journey before I even had my driver's license. So I've been flying longer than I've been driving a car for. I'd finished my instrument rating test, which is a very, very large hump in your flying training career. For those that don't know flying too much, that are listening in, it's a big thing to be allowed to fly on instruments and fly in cloud. And I had done that before I had my driver's license as well. That's kind of where I started my career journey, and ended up spending 23 years in the Air Force. Most of my time was instructing and instructing instructors and testing instructors and setting aviation standards by assessing all of the instructors on various platform types, right from fast jets all the way through to transports. And I also spent some time in New Zealand Air Force on exchange, instructing their jet force over there, and have been lucky enough to be involved in display flying as well, which most military people don't get, which is an entirely different discipline. As part of my aviation career, so I was in the museum for the Air Force here, flying a lot of the old aeroplanes and doing displays down there. I was involved in a jet aerobatic display team in New Zealand that they put together for the millennium, and I saw the dawn of the millennium in the easternmost part of the country upside down in a 5-ship with 4 other jets surrounded around me. And then the highlight really was being fortunate enough, this really leaned into the leadership stuff of being able to lead our national formation aerobatic team, the Roulettes, and did that for a long time before I then left the military. And then the last sort of decade plus of my life, I've been in 6 or 7 different startups and founded a few companies and been in defence industry and out of defence industry, but all in the commercial aspect and commercial world, from small business really perspective, but being involved in a lot of large scale business from governance perspective and delivery of programs, and also sort of writing of requirements and all sorts of bits and pieces along that journey, which is where I end up today, having an AI agency with also a cybersecurity arm to it, and helping businesses on that journey. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Well, mate, you weren't kidding when you said eclectic, and I think that's it's an amazing part of the story to go, well, you were flying at 250, 300 miles an hour, no doubt at the start of your career before you could even drive for 60 kilometers an hour. A lot of is that something that was always a passion for you, or something you always wanted to do, was fly?
Yeah, my first memory ever as a child was looking up, seeing an airplane and thinking me. And that is literally my first memory. And then all the way through my childhood and my schooling years was all I was very fortunate to have a very singular focus and a single goal to work towards, and I think that stood me in good stead right from those early days to end up having the aviation career that I had. But then, interestingly, having had all of that journey and then managing to end up where I was in aviation, part of the way through that journey is like, wow, I've achieved everything I've ever wanted to do. Now what? How do I come up with brand new goals to motivate myself to go and do other things? And that was a bit of a transition I found, and something that I grappled with mentally for quite some time.
I think that's a fairly common story for a lot of veterans, especially people, my background's aviation as well, but you go into that world going, this is what I want to do, this is my motivation. And you've got a very clear path to head towards, or probably shouldn't say clear path, but you've got a clear set of goalposts to head towards, because it's right there in front of you. So as you went through your aviation career in the Air Force, it sounds to me like there was a lot of continued technical and specialist roles that you progressed through as a pilot, as an instructor, and then finally as a senior test and evaluation officer in that environment. How did the leadership side of things manifest throughout that, noting that pilots in the Air Force are officers and they are required to take on a leadership role right from the very beginning? But when your brain is so focused on the technical hands and feet stuff, how does leadership come across to you at that?
It's really funny you say that, actually, because when you say that pilots in the Air Force take on a leadership role early, I actually don't think they do in a lot of ways. And the reason that I say that is, if you simply think about it kind of like this, especially compared to the other military arms, in the Army, it's very, very hierarchical. And you start off as an officer telling people literally to run into the battle zone and go to war, and your leadership days start from day one. In the Navy, you're all on the warship, you all go to war together. So you're literally fighting alongside. In the Air Force, the officers go to war, and the troops, the maintainers and the people kind of below you, especially as a junior officer, you've got no one really below you. And so you learn all of your warfighting skills pretty much on your own, and you're the junior being told what to do and then how to grow in that environment. So your leadership journey actually happens a lot later in your career compared to the other arms of the military. So it's a different paradigm, I think, especially for an aviation officer in the Air Force, to then actually learn leadership. And you get thrust into an environment that you are highly technically capable, but by the time you actually are leading someone, you know how to do that job, and the people that you lead are doing the job that you just did more often than not, as a sort of generic kind of career path as it happens in the Air Force. So by the time you actually are really in charge as a senior flight lieutenant rank, or in charge of fellow aviators, or your early squadron leader days in charge of as a flight commander or something like that, you're just helping people that were just doing what you've just done and been highly technically skilled at. Translate that to a lot of other people that lead lots of other people that haven't done and the same career path, or you're leading other people that don't have the same technical skills that you had. That's quite a different paradigm, I think. So the leadership stuff in the Air Force really happens because you've got the technical expertise in one very, very niche area, and the people you're in charge of are of that same niche, generally speaking. So I think it's a bit different. So probably, I think of leadership very much as it's such a relationship thing. But I was quite fortunate that I had time to reflect on before I actually took over those roles, to think about all the people that had influenced me, and to be the officer and pilot that I was or wanted to be, to then how do I want to take over that, knowing that I'm stepping into something that's very, very technical, and I've got all of the technical experience that I'll ever need to be able to lead the people underneath me. So that's why I think it's a tiny bit different.
Well, that's a really interesting point of view. And I guess from my perspective as an aviation officer, like non-pilot aviator, is I was in a large crew aircraft from day one. So it was, you almost saw that, that side of leadership come in maybe a little bit earlier on than the traditional pilot stream. But I completely agree with what you're saying, that it's not something that you are necessarily expected to do, by and large, just by virtue of being an aviation officer. So I think I know from my experience, you do take on those mentors, whether they realize they're a mentor for you or not. You see the people that you're like, oh, that's the kind of person that's the kind of leader that I want to be like. And I do talk about and tell stories about a few people from very early on in my aviation career who kind of set the standard for the type of aviator and the type of leader that I wanted to be. And it was always that people focused element. So with that in mind, how did that then translate for you as you moved through your Air Force journey and then started to take on those roles as the flying display lead and the senior instructor and assessor, where you not only had to convey technical excellence, but also manage the lives of all these people in a very high risk environment?
Yeah, and one of the things that I'll just touch on quickly before I sort of, I guess, delve more into that specifically is that starting an instructional career very early on, you might, I didn't think it really is leadership at that point. And that's maybe a subtly different perspective, even though you are leading, obviously you're the instructor teaching someone, but that it's a one-on-one environment. So that's where I found it quite different from that perspective. You are leading your student and you're teaching your student, but a one-on-one environment is very, very different from actually leading a group of people and being in front of a group of people constantly. And so the conversations that you have, it's so relationship based so early on in your leadership journey that stood me in probably a subtly different standing, different stead. And because I started instructing so early, all of my students were actually older than me. So as a social footprint, there was no gradient whatsoever. So there might be a gradient in the cockpit of technical expertise, but there's zero social gradient of the people that I'm in charge of. So that was probably part of the paradigm, which I end up being later on, finding myself in charge of that much more hierarchical structure, still with that relationship mindset of treating all the people that were under my remit and my care as my equals, because they also had immense technical expertise.
That's really interesting. I've spoken to a few people over the last few years that go through they're all Air Force veterans, so they go through the same sort of officer training program and those sort of aviation leadership roles. But the ones that I've found that really take to leadership and really have the most success personally and professionally as leaders are actually somewhat removed from that hierarchical element that you talked about from the military perspective. And I think a lot of people looking in from the outside, they think, oh, it's the military, it's rank and file and structure. And it is that. But what you said there really speaks to me is like, well, you're treating everyone as an equal. There is a responsibility that you have to a certain level of influence and a certain level of organizational success. But ultimately, you're dealing with people. And if you go into a conversation or into an interaction with I'm better than you, or I feel like I'm less than you, well, you've already established a power gradient that probably shouldn't be there and really can't be there with effective leadership. So how do you think that those, or rephrase the question, did any of those interpersonal elements help with your transition into entrepreneurship and into business ownership later on?
Yeah, very much so. It permeates part of my DNA still to this day with all of those relationships. And I'll tell you a mini story early on that happened to me flying wise. So it will make sense where I'm going with this in a second. Bear with me as I sort of kind of diverge for a tiny little bit. But my very, very first instructional sortie ever. So here I was. Super junior, really, really young. I think at the time was probably the youngest instructor since World War II or something like that. So still only a flying officer. So quite junior in rank. Had my first student, and obviously you need to give students emergencies. It's just the nature of flying training. So I gave my student what they call a little bit of a trim runaway. So that means one of the control surfaces just kind of like starts doing its own thing. And then waiting for the student to step in and see what was happening and take control, but he didn't. he actually lost control of the aeroplane, and we flicked and went upside down. And I was completely shocked by his response. So I obviously took over. He was completely and utterly confused. And then, came back down, spoke about on the ground, through the debrief, bits and pieces and stuff like that. And then it occurred to me that one of the key things that you do in flying training before you give a student an emergency is you say the words for practice. And in reality, everyone knows that you're never going to have an emergency and someone tells you it's for practice, because that's just not how emergencies happen. But what I have since learned is that what you're doing by saying that is you're taking away the fear factor for the student. They know that it's not a real situation. It gives them a moment of second in their brain to process that, which allows them a little bit of calmness, so that in a really, really foreign, challenging environment of military aviation, they can then perform to a higher peak performance. And that's part of the reason why you would say something like that. Now, I neglected to say that in that very, very, very first scenario. So that led me to then realize I've actually contributed to the students' behavior and their reaction. And part of that process in my thinking from that very first instructional sortie, I always think about, what have I done to contribute to the environment, to the outcomes that are actually happening? What have I said to someone? Have I set someone up? Have I not told them the information that they need before I make any judgment decisions on where it is, what's happening, how it all is? It's all now part of my cultural DNA in my relationship for me that I take with me to this very day, especially in small business. Because small business owners, their heads are in a bazillion places. They're constantly doing all sorts of things. You get a very small snippet of their time to give them some information, and then in trying to figure out a solution that works for them, whether they're your client or whether you're hiring someone to help you with something. So part of that, constantly, that thought process still with me today is like, what have I done to contribute to not achieving the outcome, or why is this taking so long? Haven't you listened to that? I've told you that 1,000 times. We've all had conversations like that with people, and it's never ending. So I started bear with me that process the whole way through, and it's still, I find it hugely relevant in business.
I absolutely agree. It's actually, I love that story because it speaks to that concept of reflecting on ourselves as leaders and going and asking ourselves, am I part of the problem? And that can be such a hurdle for people to get over, is, well, I'm the leader. I shouldn't be part of the problem. It must be everyone else. But the door that opens up when you can reflect and realize, oh no, I am contributing to this. Because once you've realized that, you can then do something about it. And it's really, that's on the programs that we run, the training programs we run, that's the first point of reflection that we ask people to reflect on. Session 1, day 1 is, are you part of the problem? And that's how you work with people.
Yeah, and I love that. I absolutely love that. But I think it's the next sentence that most people have trouble with, because they don't know how to assess objectively themselves. And that is part of the root key fundamental things to actually ponder and reconcile in your own brain to being able to have success to ask that question, because it goes deeper than just asking that question.
It absolutely does. And I'm not sure about you, but I know that my aviation background, we focus so much on debriefing and learning and trying to get that objectivity into scenarios that make us very uncomfortable. I know that serves me well to really look at it. Well, what are the facts telling me? What is the environment telling me about the root cause of this problem that's currently occurring? Have you found that any of your, I suppose, aviation specific techniques, personally or professionally, have helped you as you've transitioned into small business?
Constantly. And it's exactly what you're saying. And it's going through that debrief. And I do a debrief on everything, and I do it like internally. Sometimes I'll do it externally. And when I started businesses, when I first left, and got one of my first business partners, who happened to be also ex-military, first thing I said to him, well, you'll struggle with this initially. And the reason being is you're not going to get feedback. Your clients, your colleagues, our suppliers, no one will give us the feedback which we've lived our whole lives. So we need to put in place ways of being able to capture that information to make those informed decisions, while taking your emotional response out of it, because it is very hard to do, especially a lot more so when you're involved in business, and then your brand is your own. As the business owner, you wear all of that as your personal heart, your personal journey, your personal passion. That's what goes into running a small business. And then realizing that other people don't necessarily care about your product or might try and tinker with your product, but they certainly won't buy into it the way that you will buy into it. And you won't get that feedback as to why. That's where a lot of people can sometimes have some dramas and issues with that comms. And taking their own emotion out of that, have I influenced that situation? To ask yourself objectively, what's actually going on here? And then trying to understand the perception of your clients and what they are seeing and what their problems are, and putting yourself with enough empathy in their shoes to look objectively at yourself, to figure out how can I make the situation a little bit better, and then opening the door to having a conversation with them.
And that actually leads me into sort of the next question, is with the work you're doing now, where you are educating people with around artificial intelligence and automation and cyber challenges, how do you find your clients go when you start to encourage them to ask themselves whether they are contributing to the problem?
Well, it's funny, Lane. Funny, before you even get to that question, it's asking them enough to even understand the tech. And I get all sorts of answers, because especially at the small to medium business enterprise sort of paradigm, a lot of people just have their head in the sand, and they'll say things like, I know I need AI, I know I need automation, just make it cybersecure, just do it, but they don't know what's next. So before you even get to some really fundamental questions about things like, well, what's your customer journey look like? What's the appropriate level of human in the loop for what you want to do with your clients? You have to ask all that before you can start to say, how do you feel about how you've contributed to that environment space, and what you might be doing better for yourself to actually change that as well? So I find that there's a few barriers there, because you're taking them outside of their normal thought process for a little while. It's really, really, really hard for business owners to do, because they are so focused. 99% of their brain is focused on just one thing, and that's their business and the outcome of their business and their clients. And so to get them to reflect and look at themselves is actually quite a difficult ask a lot of the time. Challenging, highly worthwhile, 1000%, but it's just getting them to get enough understanding to go, stop. Perspective is an incredible thing for you right now.
It sounds a bit like the unconscious incompetence versus conscious incompetence journey, right? Where we go, well, actually, you have to provide a level of education first so they can realize how much they just don't understand. So you can start to build them back up again. And that can be a challenge. And sometimes it happens very quickly, and sometimes it's if you've got your head really buried in the sand like an ostrich, then you're going to have a tough time. So what are you seeing as some of those challenges around, I guess we'll focus on the business leadership element first before we focus on the people leadership side, but what challenges are you seeing as AI is this shiny beacon of hope for businesses to improve productivity, to improve revenue and all those sort of things? What are some of the challenges you're seeing business owners facing with their successful adoption of AI?
It's pretty, I've quite a very simple answer on this, and it's quite literally a tiny bit of education again. So AI literacy, and I don't mean, days and days and days to be a technical expert. I mean, just enough. And having a roadmap and foundation and a pathway, because the tech is so new, it's so emerging, so many shiny objects out there. Everyone's using a bit of chat GPT, and they'll get their fingers dirty with it and they'll go, I'll just do it like this. And they don't think about how they're actually embedding it across their business for what outcome specifically. And and a lot of business owners will jump between tools. But Gemini 3.0 is now better. Why am I using that one? And but now they're using this tool over here that's better for creating images. It's like, just stop, because they don't have that foundational approach. So it's a bit like buying a brand new TV, and you walk into the TV store and there's like 57 TVs, all with different resolutions and sizes, and you go like, oh my God, this is just too much. And all of the wealth of AI tools that are out there is all a little bit the same way. So how do you select the right one and is there a right one? And what's your foundation? What's your roadmap? What's your pathway? So a little bit of breath in that. Just take a step back for half a second before you have a little bit of a journey down there, and be prepared to change your decisions down track as you go, but have key metrics and decision points along that journey so that you're going towards what your business outcome and goals really are. And so, I've seen some businesses don't even have a proper business strategy, which is a whole nother side part to that as well. Because a lot of small businesses think, oh, I don't need to do that. But they quickly run into all these problems if they don't have that alongside of this for the tech stack. But then hand in hand with that is a tiny little bit of education in AI literacy. And what do I mean by that is things like understanding the limitations of when you're using like a chat GPT, like, what does hallucination mean? And everyone's gone, well, that's just garbage. That's not true. It's hallucinating. But why is it doing that? What's a confabulation, which is actually a plausible lie, which is much actually harder to pick up on. What is grounding? What's that technique all about? What's the context window? What's all that? What does that actually mean? And how do I attach a knowledge base to it and commercial enterprise IP and then put it inside of a tech stack? Because when you start building that kind of a picture and having enough time to think about those tiny little things to then put inside of a roadmap, after that, take a breath, then you can go forwards, then you can start to see some proper return on investment. Depending on, and my pause in there is that there's still a large cost associated with this picture that most people have in their head of what they think AI could and should be able to do. And it certainly has some insane upsides to where it currently is, but the costs associated with it to be able to build it properly to go forwards across multiple different data streams. So, and we're not really at that high end stuff yet, but it's happening rapidly overnight, and the costs are changing overnight. But without that foundation stuff, navigating through that becomes quite a difficult journey. I think that's the largest challenge.
I can, straight away when you were talking about people going, well, oh, we want that, we want to do this, or, oh, we don't need to do that because we're too small. We're seeing that reflected in clients that we have worked with to help facilitate some strategy development with them. And when we look at the SWOT analysis, well, AI generally falls into either an opportunity or a risk, and it is, or threat, I guess, an opportunity or a threat. And but most of the time, I'd say probably 99 times out of 100, it is opportunity, leverage AI, okay, or threat. What? We don't use AI, okay? Why? And that's that next level where it's like AI, they can spell it, but they don't necessarily know what it means. And if you don't have that clear picture of, like to use the military aviation term as well, work from the target backwards. What do you need to achieve, or what do you want to achieve? What resources do you have to do that? And how can AI and automation and cyber protect what you've got and help you get the most out of what you're trying to do with what you've got? So it's amazing how it even outside of the strategy, those same conversations exist.
Yeah, totally. I'm saying the same thing. Yep.
So then, if you were to start to have that conversation with a potential client, as they're committed, they want to embed automation AI into their business. They want to take the lead on that sort of tech stack implementation. What might be 2 or 3 questions that you would pose to them to start to get them to think about how they want to use the AI or why they want to implement certain technology?
Well, I come back at them with exactly those questions. What do they think that is? And more often than not, they don't know how to answer it. And the reason I ask that is because I'm getting a foundational understanding of their understanding of what that actually means. And so from the core instructor background in me is like, I need to know, what do you know first before I can actually move forwards to where you need to be? And you'll know this very well from aviation training and blogs as the generic student. What's the first question the instructor asks? What does blogs know? What do they need to know? How do I then teach them? And so that same thing happens in business right now. So what do you actually know? What are you trying to do? Where's your gaps? Let's start to go down that path. And that's what I do. And so some business owners are quite tech savvy. Some business owners, especially most businesses, will have 1 or 2 inside the business that are tech savvy. and this is where the leadership comes out, they don't actually know who their most tech-savvy people are, and they don't know how to get the best out of those people to make the business better. And so it's about identifying all of that stuff to begin with before you even have those kind of foundational conversations, is to then getting one of the key things that I always look for is who is going to be the champion in your business to run this going forwards, for a bunch of reasons, a lot of which is that, but also as a clear channel of communication between my business and their business as well into the leadership. Because mixed comms and misunderstanding of what all this technology is all over the place. It's prevalent everywhere because everything's just happening so quickly. So most people think it's, I use ChatGPT, I'm AI literate. It's like, not necessarily, and you may well be 100%, but then you ask, what about all those hallucination granted techniques and prompting techniques and all this types of, I use prompting technique. Okay, but why? What for? What's the purpose? Do you know what a context window is? How do you set up your infrastructure? What knowledge base? How do you connect that? And it doesn't take long before you realize they're not very literate, but they think that they are. And just getting through all of that to begin with, there's lots of backwards and forwards questions that I have, generally through mini workshop sessions or just going and grabbing coffee with the owner or maybe one or two key people in the business, and just building that relationship and trust to begin with, so that we can then have a proper nuanced conversation about what the next steps would look like, so that they can get a foundation roadmap together, and then at least we're all talking from the same sheet of music to go forwards, and then we'll bounce something right off that alleyway as you progress.
No, I'm definitely one of those lay people. I've only recently just started using some of the paid versions of the open source tools to help me with a few things, and it's done for me so far is tell me how much I don't understand about the world. So there's maybe a follow-on conversation or 7 that we need to have after this chat.
Yeah.
So I just want to focus on that point you made about the business leader not necessarily knowing who their most tech savvy or tech literate people are within their business. Do you find on the other side as well that there are these very tech literate and tech savvy people within businesses? How do you think leaders can get the most out of them, even when they are identified?
Yeah, look, this is a brilliant question. And this is a story that I tell lots of people on my leadership journey specifically. And one of the companies that I was previously involved with, I'll talk about this specifically. And earlier on, I was mentioning that my military leadership, I was always leading people who had the same technical skill that I had when I was in their shoes. So one of the companies that I was previously involved in, we employed a bunch of data scientists, and I'd never been a data scientist before. I didn't know how to employ them. I didn't know how to get the best out of them. So I literally had this conversation with them to then say, well, tell me what you do. Okay, I understand data science, but tell me what you do and what you bring specifically, so I can actually learn my team. But then the very next iteration of that conversation is, tell me what I need to do to get out of your way so that you can provide the best for the company going forwards. Help me understand how to lead you, because I've never been a data scientist. I don't know what you need. You can't assume that I know what you need to achieve what you need to achieve. We need to work together to have a conversation on that so that so the company as a whole gets much better. So taking that background and experience that I've personally lived, is how I then have that same conversation with the leaders that I talk to then go ask them who's your best people, and then help them on that journey so that they can also get the best out of their people to identify them and then help them, because everything's such an individual thing. Everyone needs different things. So that what they need to then do is put in place to get the best out of those people and positions of responsibility, and how you want to start going down that journey to help them out.
No, I completely understand what you're saying, is that it was my similar experience to me when I was in the Air Force. It's like, well, yeah, we're all there. We all kind of think the same. We all understand what we're there to do. We all have clarity over the mission and the goal we're trying to achieve. But when I stepped out into private industry and started that second part of the next part of my leadership journey, I found myself as a capability manager, as a program manager for a complex tech development project. And, in this we had, airframe engineers and electronics engineers and software developers and AI people. And, when the technical lead has 2 PhDs and I have my half of an aviation degree, I'm like, I have, you've forgotten more than I'm ever going to know about what you do. And I remember having a similar conversation with those people who were very influential because they were the technical experts in a highly technical environment about help me understand what you do and help me understand what you need from me to do the most with what you do. And that's a very humbling experience as a leader, especially coming out of the military when like, I was in a leadership position because I knew more than other people. Whereas now I'm in a leadership position without knowing more than other people. In fact, I know a heck of a lot less. And not only that, but I've now got to communicate this big, ugly, hairy goal over here to them in a way that isn't the language I need to hear, but it's the language they need to hear. So that flow of information and that empowerment for them to do the good work, because otherwise, if I'm trying to hold all the keys and hold all the locks, then we're going nowhere. We're going to be sitting in our chairs, spinning around, hoping for the best, and no one's going to get anywhere. And I think that's only going to get worse when AI continues to be embedded in businesses, because all that's doing is accelerating the rate of change with technology. And it's going to be even easier than ever to get left behind if we're not leaning forward on that, but not leaning forward so much that we're actually just waiting to fall over.
Yeah, 100%. And AI thoroughly will change this landscape more quickly than most people are prepared for. And I was just going to make mention, I love the use of the word humbling. And I think that those that will succeed in a technical world going forwards are those that are prepared to feel humble about it and understand and acknowledge that that's actually a strength to not know what you don't know and then lean into that to seek help. And that can be with other humans, but it can also be with the tech itself. As the tech gets better and better and stronger. A lot of people will kind of feel fear to then go, oh no, I need to just show that I know what I'm doing. And as opposed to being a little bit vulnerable and a bit authentic and a little bit humble is one of the most strongest key ingredients to leadership in my mind. That doesn't mean to say that you have to lack confidence. That I find that if you have the confidence to say that, you'll generally pull that off in a really amazing manner to get people to listen to you and buy into you and trust you a lot more. Those key ingredients and that word humble, I really, really love.
I think I've had many opportunities to be humbled in corporate leadership, in leading some just phenomenally smart people. And then you realize that actually a lot of 5-year-olds now probably have more tech knowledge than I do, because it's just part of their learning environment. Like my off topic a little bit, but my son's currently doing his first code camp. He just turned 7, and he's the way they're teaching it is like he just got it. All of a sudden he's using this online tool. It's it's essentially block and process coding. He's not smashing script or anything like that, but just the way he picked up that workflow of how to build things together, the elements you need to build, how you put them together, is just like, okay, great. Well, okay, I'm even further behind than I thought, but that's the world we live in. And with AI, I just want to go back to where you were talking about that fear that some people have, that they have to seem like they know what's going on. What are you seeing within the organizations you work with or work around regarding the fear around AI?
Yeah, very much just complete, total, bury their head in the sand. There's kind of not a lot in the middle. And what I mean is that those that will definitely lean in and get their hands dirty and play and start to understand it and become a little bit literate and not be fearful and just actually start using them. Those that will just kind of like tinker with it or just use ChatGPT, but then there's a fear for them doing anything else. And so I'll just ask it what I did on the weekend or make me a recipe on something or, that kind of type level 0.1 kind of use case is how I think of it. And then they just don't even want to know. and then just go, I've seen a lot of people, especially, some incredibly smart people. I've got some friends that have PhDs and researchers, and they're like, I refuse to use any AI whatsoever. It's like, okay, it's very noble, and I understand where you're coming from, but your fear, you will be left behind so quickly. Even though you as a PhD in the element that you have some immense skills in, is still highly relevant for your channel and your audience. The fear is so great that it's paralyzing, that they won't lean into the technology, because it won't take long for the generic tools to actually have IQ smarter than humanity if we're on the path that we're on. And I think that it will gradually peak a little bit, and there'll be a hump period. So it won't be an acceleration of tech, is potentially a completely different conversation. But I think we'll still have a potentially larger grace period than what a lot of the hype will have us believe, which is great because it allows us all to take a breath and kind of catch up a little bit. But we will break through that at some point. I don't think there's too much doubt about that. And that's when, people will get left behind rapidly. So there are those that will, and those will get left behind, is kind of the way I think of it.
Yeah, and I think that what we see in the media is kind of the two ends of that spectrum, where there's the hype around what it can be, and then the fear that AI is replacing jobs, or really it's probably more the automation side is replacing jobs. So whereas the reality is somewhere in the middle, where sure there are, of course there is this huge upside with productivity and what we can potentially achieve around scientific breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs, and we have things that can think faster than us and process data much faster than the human brain. But I also understand that there's that fear side of people going, well, I don't want to touch AI because that'll take my job. If I acknowledge that it exists, then and I don't push back on it hard, it's going to increase the risk that my job is replaced. Where do you see the reality falling right now? And I want to look at that from a leadership perspective. So there's leaders within an organization. It could be business leaders. It could be, executives within an organization. They know that they've done the work, say with you or another agency that said, okay, this is what we need to achieve what we want to achieve. Where does the reality sit for how those leaders work with the people to successfully implement the AI tech stack?
Yeah, it's such a individualized question, also answer, because the way that I see a lot of the AI and automation for the best return right now is, it's almost, think of like having death by 1,000 cuts. So each little paper cut is something tiny, tiny, minute, but when it adds up to something really painful or really great. The AI right now is best in tiny little use cases, little snippets all through that, and enhancing each person's kind of like little bit of interaction with the business. So I think that's the best bet at the moment for that high-end, large-scale, massive database and multiple different software platform and financial and marketing and sales and operational platforms and data, and moving all of that and having all this AI. That's where the scale and the return on investment isn't there, and technically very, very difficult, and quite a lot of time and investment and money to build, without generally a lot of success most of the time as we speak in today's language. That'll change very quickly, but just having enough of a dip the toes in a couple of those really, really, really small, short, sharp areas, and you do that with the people in those roles to help them get better. That, I think, has to be the leadership mantra, to go, don't have fear around this. We're actually making you better, making you stronger, making you more valuable inside of our business by giving you these tools to do it in this manner for that little task. And a lot of people will have all of the fear of, well, if that can do that, maybe my output needs to be 3 times as more. And that's where a lot of the fear base can sometimes come from. But leaders, if they have the literacy, will know that some of those metrics are complete fallacy and too big asks. It's about understanding what key metrics to actually help people get better with their own education and use case inside of a business, to then do those tiny little death by 1,000 cuts to gradually get better.
So it kind of goes back to what you were saying about asking those experts, those data scientists, well, what do you need from me so that you can get the most out of yourself? Well, this is just another tool, right? Well, AI can help a lot of people, automation can help a lot of people, and will potentially help them feel like their job is more engaging and will feel more connected to what the business needs to achieve, and that they themselves could feel more productive. But it really is that communication piece, isn't it? That it's just, you don't just do things for the sake of doing things. We do things for a reason, and people need to understand what that reason is. And I think that it shouldn't really be treated any different to any other change. Well, why are we changing? There should be a tangible reason for that change.
And I would also, from an ethical leadership perspective, use the word deliberately of increasing their value in the business. So not their production. How do I increase their value in the business so that they feel more valued as a person and feel more like they're contributing greater value to the company, because everyone thrives on that, generally speaking. And of course, that's, those that don't do that, well, they're the ones that may be left behind a little bit. But by and large, most people love to feel like they're contributing a lot of value to the company and the greater good, and themselves and their boss. And if you can create that environment through the tech stack, I think that's where you can get some really good wins.
Yeah, it's a supporting element. It can't function on its own. You can't just point it at something and go, solve all my problems. And that's where this connection between, what is the organization doing for society? What is the organization contributing? So from a defense industry's perspective, well, we're contributing to national security. So then you go, okay, well, how does everyone's own individual role connect to that? And then how does AI and the automation tools and the tech stack support them to grow their own value, to contribute to that greater good, to contribute to that bigger picture?
And I think from exactly along those lines, I think from an executive in a company, and just thinking more like potentially a medium-sized business now, a lot of the vernacular and hype is around medium-sized company cutting 10, 15% staff to achieve the same thing. What they should be thinking about is, with the staff that we have, we could achieve 20% more. And what do we want to do with that to grow the company and the business through that education and that value-based proposition for the people that they currently have? Because they've got those people are already valued to be working in the company right now. So enhance that. So it should be an additive measure, not a minus measure from a bottom line of money and overhead of people. People aren't the overhead. People are your capability. People are the best thing you have in your business. Enhance them with the tech is how I think most executives should be talking. And I don't think that vernacular has been prevalent enough through a lot of the media.
I completely agree. It really is that shift from a cost mindset. Oh, we can save costs by replacing people. It's like, well, no, we can invest in things to help people so we can all do more. It's the investment mindset versus the cost mindset. And I love what you said there, that people are the greatest asset of a business, because that is true. That we always talk about it, is that businesses can't run without people. That is it. And I'm not sure they ever will, at least not in my lifetime. I wouldn't think so. So with AI though, and with automation, do you see that there could be risks or threats increased by incorrect implementation or maybe short-sighted implementation?
Oh, 100%, 100%. There's a wealth of different risks right across the board if you don't implement things the right way. And the most obvious and easiest one is loss of time, just by mucking around and going down rabbit holes constantly of just learning the tech stack and going, just like, oh, I'll just play GPT, and then 3 hours go by and you go, what have I actually achieved for my business? I've got some amazing conversations on it, 5 degrees, but like, what am I actually doing here? So you just get sidetracked so quickly, and you're trying to learn the stuff, and then you're just trying to understand all this. And it's like people just go down rabbit holes constantly and jump to the nearest shiny thing, and then go, oh, hang on, but 5.2's just come out. Oh my God, I've got to learn this. And why is this one so different? And it's like, I think that's one of the largest risks is just that time investment, but to do so in an appropriate manner, to try and understand what it is you're actually getting out of it and what's working for your business, and then to marry the two. And often it takes someone from outside that world with a bit of perspective to chat to then realize, like, oh, Yeah, okay, now I don't have to jump into the hype quite so much, and can take a steady, measured approach, but still upscale myself with the appropriate tech and not be left behind. Because a lot of that theory is like everyone else is doing it, therefore I have to, but I don't know what I'm doing with it yet. And they're not vulnerable enough to admit that they don't know what they're doing with it yet. And that's where that vulnerability piece and humbleness piece that we spoke about really comes to fruition if you get that right.
Yeah, and I can imagine that if people are just jumping from tool to tool and it's this open source option over here and this, I'll try this one over here, that the risk of then the human element of mistakes or loss of intellectual property control or loss of governance could really be exponentially compounded by now putting that out into the world in a very unsecure way or insecure way. And it's a really interesting point that you've made a few times throughout this, is that it's that the not jumping at shiny things, but investing in what can we actually invest in now it's at a small scale to hit that low-hanging fruit. The death by 1,000 paper cuts analogy is, well, how can we help individuals right now for a smaller investment to then grow over time? Once we build literacy that way, we build education that way, and we start to layer more and more on top, rather than going where I've seen some businesses go and go, all right, well, hey, we've just done this. We've got, $2 million in capital expenditure that we need to get off the books by the end of the financial year. So we bought all this stuff. Now we're going to work out how to use it.
Yep, exactly. So definitely that foundational roadmap approach really, really helps a lot right across the board. But going back to the risks, the risk in not doing that properly is loss of time, really, to the business, and personal time for all of the staff, all the executives. That's one of the larger risks, let alone the commercial risk, let alone the cyber risk. A lot of people with that commercial risk sort of misunderstand a little bit, just because you put a potentially commercial question into GPT or a proposal or a bit of client information. That doesn't necessarily mean, say, that if someone else Googles or asks GPT about that business or your business, that will instantly pop up. That's not kind of how these things work. But it does open up the door for a lot of the way that you employ the LLMs and access the LLMs through your IT systems really is more the cyber risk. And then locking down that information that you need to lock down commercially and bits and pieces to make sure it's employed inside of like an appropriate OT stack. So there's risk across the board, and understanding the fact that you need to have an appropriate risk policy on that. And that doesn't have to be a labor-intensive 50-page long document. You can come up with that relatively quite quickly, just to put some guardrails and boundaries around how you're employing that and making sure that your staff understand that. And I've seen a lot of businesses go hardcore and just have one blanket thing. You can only talk about this one thing, not allowed to talk about anything else. Like, that's not kind of pseudo helpful. So it's that level of appropriateness in that world to understand how best to do it to start to get some reasonable outcomes.
So to sort of just bring this all back together, there's a lot of stuff we've talked about from the technical side, from the business efficiency side, and from the human and leadership side as well. If you could pick, say, one bit of advice for leaders and executives wanting to implement things on the technical side, and one bit of advice for leaders wanting to implement it from the human side, what could those things be?
I have two words: literacy and authenticity. So having a little bit of time for literacy in a tech stack, and that doesn't have to be arduous whatsoever, but remaining authentic and humble, because human relationships aren't going away, and it's going to still be the cornerstone for everything that we do in business and your life going forwards. So I think they're the two things, and tie those two things together, and you're definitely on the right footing.
I love it, mate. Absolutely fantastic. So in this world of exceptional complexity, if people want to get in contact with you and your business, how can they find you?
Yeah, just simply reach out to stephen@autocom.work or www.autocom.work, and you can look me up there. And more than happy to have a chat with anyone at any point about this world, because I love the human side to the technology. That's the bit that drives me the most.
Absolutely, mate. And that's what, I live and breathe the human side with what I do here at Ethic Lead. So it's awesome to be able to talk to someone who really gets the technical side of it as well, but isn't losing sight of the human side, because I think sometimes, particularly in the media, you can see, it's either or. It becomes a you versus me or it versus me kind of conversation, and that's not reality. Thanks very much, Steve, for your time today. It's been a hugely educational chat for me, and I'm sure for everyone out there listening.
Thanks to you, James. Thanks to all the listeners. Fantastic chat, and I definitely look forward to some more incredible conversation.
Awesome, mate. And for everyone out there, if today has helped you learn something or given you something to reflect on, then let me know about it down in the comments. And forward this episode on to someone that you know who wants to be a better leader and wants to learn how to use tech to become that better leader. And remember that leadership isn't a title. It's not a position of authority. It's a choice. So I want you to make that choice and continue to lead on purpose. My name's James, and this is Steve, and we'll see you next time.
Ciao.